Who is this Jesus? And who are we who follow him? And where is he leading? What kind of life will we have if we follow? And what is the way along which he leads? The readings for the season of Epiphany explore these questions. And the biblical tradition is always countercultural in spirit. It agitates the comfortable, whether conservative or progressive, by challenging our lifestyles and our assumptions. And conversely, as the saying goes, it also comforts the agitated. Those at the margins of life, those with their backs against the walls, or struggling with debilitating life issues. The scriptures for today abound in relational and political reversals. And that is good. While few moderate and progressive congregations emphasize this thing called the prosperity gospel, God's reward of the faithful with health and wealth and prosperity and success in life, we implicitly reap the benefits of a society weighted towards the haves rather than the have-nots. And we also connect, at least implicitly, prosperity and entitlement. We put those together. And we put poverty and inferiority together. Welfare parents are screened for drug use. The working poor have to argue for living wages, while the rich and the famous lifestyles of consumerism, greed, and debauchery is rewarded by tax breaks and corporate welfare. That's not the kingdom of God. Any spiritual tradition that claims that the last will be first or sacrifice is essential to reality will be countercultural in this world. Always will be. In a world that says more is always better. If you listen carefully to the texts that we've read this morning, and listen intently with what's going on between the lines, I want to suggest that they are speaking to the elite and the powerful of the nations, to the equivalent of the CEOs of the corporate world and the financial world, and to presidents and prime ministers and world leaders and their cabinets and governments. God expresses his grievances. Beautiful houses of worship, well-crafted liturgies. The gifts to the coffers of religious institutions are commended. But such signs of generosity matter only if we take justice seriously. What does God want from us but to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with God? The prophet Micah says. God reminds us that our generosity is problematic and spiritually destructive if it is grounded in widening the gap between rich and poor. Violent economic and social structures and a sense of entitlement. God's not interested in that. Everything comes from God. Our wealth emerges from divine creativity and never fully our own efforts. Power and wealth may depend upon a degree of creativity and initiative upon our parts, but it also depends on the efforts of workers, the income of consumers, and ecosystems that undergird social order. Humility. Humility is a requirement in an interdependent universe. It's a little hard to get that around our heads these days, isn't it? Humility is a requirement in an interdependent universe. Psalm 15 connects this very healthy relationship with God with honest and fair economic and interpersonal relationships. Whether in politics or business or personal life, dishonesty, fake news, and exaggerated bloviating. You know what that word? I came across that word. I looked it up. I thought that's an interesting word. It means to speak or write verbosely and windedly. So I get the image of a bloated cow. Anyway. That separates us from God and from one another, all of that stuff. And it's obvious that it's happening in our society today, where people simply operate according to a very different set of facts and dissembling in the norm on social media. But let us not be too smug as we look south of the border of our violation of trust as well. In the micro and the macro, it alienates us from our neighbors, but even worse, from divine wisdom. Let's not get too smug. And in Paul's words to the church at Corinth, they also have this countercultural tone. The cross is foolishness to politician and cleric alike. To those who place in the social order depends on wealth and power, on domination, a God who wins through sacrifice is absolute foolishness. Or as the English Standard Version says, folly. A God who suffers is unworthy to be called God. Yet we preach, Paul says, Christ crucified. The powerless, suffering God, pushed to the margins by human greed and power. And to those who want to reestablish countries as Christian nations, Paul's words are foolishness. Paul's words suggest that although in our time we should affirm our values as followers of Jesus, our Christian values are not to be used as battering rams, excommunicating diverse voices and dominating the social order or marketplace of ideas. God doesn't seek dominance. He's not in the business of dominance. God seeks relationship. And relationship always involves sacrifice. I think you probably figured that out by now. It always involves sacrifice. Letting go of our agenda, letting go of our security, letting go of our time and our talent and our treasure for the greater good. Or the phrase we hear these days, the common good. The sacrificial God nailed to the cross challenges the image of a second coming in which God's primary work is destructive And God's people escape this tribulation by supernatural rapture. Suffering love is at the very heart of fidelity, whether it is God's or our own. And this is always contrary to the norms of theology, economics, and politics. I'm not sure what you've been raised in, whether you have your rapture deck built on the top of your house so you'll be closer when it happens, or how that's all going to work out. But Brian McLaren calls this evacuation theology. The belief that this life is just a testing ground for another better world, and that faith is about separation from the world and its issues in order to be ready for this other world. It's a deeply destructive influence in our world. Because when that theology, as good as points of it are, but when that theology works itself out, it makes sense to hate and kill those who believe differently, because they are a threat to our purity, and therefore to our attaining this other world, even as they seek to kill us for the same reason. In such theology, it makes sense to use up the planet and care little for the impact of our consumption of its resources. I mean, it's going to be destroyed ultimately anyway. Right? It's such a theology, the poor and the sick and the marginalized are unclean and deserving of their disadvantaged lot in life. Because we know the blessings of God that comes from being pure and righteous. And separate from sin, of course. I've reached the point in my life where I now understand that this theology is not the message of the gospel. This is not the message of Jesus' gospel. If our world is to become more whole, and if the injustices and the inequalities in our world are to be addressed, we desperately need to revisit the Bible's teachings about what God requires and what Jesus actually taught. All that he taught. Because after all, that is the challenge of the Great Commission. To go and teach them all, everything. So as we look again at the gospel, we discover that God is found in working for justice, in caring for the least, and in opposing forces of violence and destruction and materialism and greed and power. And so let us revisit the cross and embrace again its call to be powerless fools in the name of Christ, bringing justice and compassion wherever we may find the opportunity. Melissa Bain-Severy, in her writing on her blog this week, makes a very interesting observation. I want to share it with you this morning. She begins to talk about the fact that when the crowds gathered, Jesus went up into the mountains and then sat down with the disciples. And he began to speak and he taught them, saying, and we get the Beatitudes as we've come to call them. And she asks, countercultural words? Well, I don't know. These sound a little wimpy to me. Blessed are the meek, merciful, peacemaker, poor in spirit. Radicalism should sound, I don't know, more radical. Humility, mercy, peace, poverty of spirit aren't exactly popular today in politics, business, self-help literature, even many faith circles. So she says, I've written my own version of the Beatitudes, hoping they might be more acceptable to modern ears. Blessed are those who have everything they could possibly want because they will have it easy. Blessed are those who are not sorry for anything they've ever done because they never have to feel bad about themselves. Blessed are the noisy, for everyone hears them and their words take on importance. Blessed are those who have plenty to eat and drink because they never have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. Blessed are the vindictive because they can get even. Blessed are the violent because violence takes care of their problems. And blessed are those who always have it easy because they have no worries. And then she says, I know they aren't right, but they sound good. They sound right. Really, who wants to worship a God who blesses the poor in the morning and the persecuted and the peacemaker? And then she says, actually, I think we all do. We all do. Because when God blesses the weak and blesses the troubled, God blesses every one of us. God blesses our loved ones in the hospital and our friends who are out of work and our neighbors who are sick and our child who may be struggling in school. Having it all straightened out actually gets in the way of being blessed. Being at the top makes us think that we've made it there on our own. Never having to mourn leads us to believe that we never will. And if we have it easy, we think that those who have had it hard must be, of course, lazy or responsible for their own life situation. Jesus' words were countercultural then, and they still are. The Beatitudes of Jesus are countercultural. The blessed ones know their dependence. They know that their morality and their spirituality is lived out one moment at a time. And it's very tenuous at best. They know the grace of interdependence, that receiving and giving, accepting and sacrificing are at the heart of reality. The blessed ones are not self-made, nor do they boast of their success or the rightness of their beliefs in tweets and press releases. They realize that healthy spirituality, healthy self-affirmation is a gift of God whose love undergirds their own efforts and achievements. The way of sacrificial love may lead to persecution or misunderstanding, but it is God's way. The pathway of unity and justice, of compassionate identification with the suffering of the world. I love this quote that is in the bulletin by Ronnie McVeigh. The Beatitudes are no spiritual to-do list, to be attempted by eager, rule-keeping disciples. It is a spiritual done list of the qualities God brings to bear in the people who follow Jesus. So the texts that we've looked at this week, in them we are asked to ponder an interdependent, humble, compassionate, and sacrificial gospel. The model of the cross. The model of letting go to transform the world is countercultural, but it is the path of healing for persons and congregations and communities and nations and the planet. We long to know your presence and your blessing, God, to know that we have found a place in your kingdom. And so we commit to being those who acknowledge our poverty of spirit and who grieve rightly our brokenness and losses. For this is how we open ourselves to blessing. We dedicate ourselves to humility and to a constant, never-ceasing hunger and thirst for justice. We seek to always act with compassion and mercy, and to keep our hearts pure, free from destructiveness and bound by integrity. We devote ourselves to working for peace and to constant celebration and rejoicing, even in the face of hardship, persecution, and struggle. Gracious and compassionate God, we offer ourselves to you again in worship and obedience, in lives committed to the purposes and practices of your way. For in this way, we know